You are Locked On Hornets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
In a minute, cuz we live.
This is Locked On Hornets, your daily podcast on the Charlotte Hornets and the NBA. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Search your favorite podcast app, iTunes, Stitcher, Overcast, for Locked On to get podcasts on the NBA, the NFL, golf, and fantasy sports. I'm Doug Branson. We've got a lot of show ahead. I've got the panel standing by. We're going to do a fantasy minute a little later on around Nick Batum. But first, we have to start with our latest player preview, and this one's a big one. It's all about Dwight Howard, and let's go right out to the Locked On line where I have standing by Rick Bonnell, beat writer for the Charlotte Observer. Rick, how are you this morning?
I'm very well, Doug. Nice for having me.
Absolutely. Well, listen, I've been really interested in this mailbag column you've been doing recently, so let's start there. What is the question that you're getting most in regards to Dwight Howard from fans right now?
It's actually kind of a basic one. It's just how much impact do you think at this stage in his career he can have on the team as a whole? Doug, it's interesting because I have had my share of criticism of Dwight Howard in the past, and I mean, he is a high maintenance player. I don't think there's any reasonable opinion that he's not. Having said that, I think sometimes we too quickly disregard the fact that this guy has never finished an NBA season not averaging a double-double. And I think it's just as important to keep in mind that one of the most obvious flaws on this team the last couple of years has been the lack of rim protection. He can obviously be a big, significant factor in that. But to be honest with you, I think the even more significant factor, since you brought up the mailbag column that I've been trying to do once a week, I think that the most significant change potentially in the short run, I'm not talking about, what Malik Monk will be in 3 or 4 years, but I think the most significant difference in that this team should demonstrate in the short run is Cody Zeller being allowed to play most of his minutes against the other team's backup center. That could arguably be as big an advantage as any for the Hornets this season.
Absolutely, and Dwight Howard did not miss more than 10 games last season, played 71 the season before, so he's been able to stay on the court. I want to flip that mailbag question around, though, and ask you, what's your biggest question surrounding Dwight Howard in terms of his fit with this Charlotte Hornets roster?
Well, Doug, you and I have talked about this in the past, how impressed I am with the chemistry in this locker room. I've covered 28, 29 NBA locker rooms. I've never seen a more professional, more quality place than the Hornets locker room has been the last couple of years. There's a work culture there. There's a sense that people are truly vested in each other's success. That comes primarily from 3 people. It comes from Marvin Williams, it comes from Kemba Walker, it comes from Michael Kidd-Gilchrist. So this is a strong situation here. For that reason, I think they'll be okay. I know that Marvin and Dwight have a long relationship. They're contemporaries. They played a lot of AAU ball against each other. Dwight is not a bad guy. I'm not implying that. I'm not. I am saying that I think that, when you are playing for your third team in as many seasons, when you get traded for Miles Plumlee's contract, that might you might want that to register on you about the perception of you in the league, and that can be a very, very constructive thing. The other day when he was doing that charity event, and he contributed $100,000 to the local Boys and Girls Clubs effort, which is a cool thing. He said that he's pretty ticked off about the perception of who he is and what he is at this stage in his career. If I'm Steve Clifford, I want him mad at that way. I want him highly motivated, but I also want him to be a person who's flexible enough to make an effort to fit in with his new group.
Yeah, because, I mean, if you look at his statistics last year for Atlanta, he averaged a double-double, 63% from the field. I mean, it's tough to take what he did on the court and translate that into, some reason why he would bounce around team to team. It obviously has a little bit more to do with relationships. And you mentioned Steve Clifford there. A lot has been made about the relationship between Steve Clifford and Dwight Howard. Howard was obviously not happy about how his tenure ended in Houston or Atlanta, but many, including both Clifford and Howard, feel like that they can work together in a way that hasn't materialized in years past. How important do you think Dwight's satisfaction will be to the team's success this season?
I think it's all up to Dwight. What I mean by that, Doug, is, I've been around Steve Clifford now for a long time, and Cliff doesn't cater to people. He doesn't patronize people. I'll always think the most interesting thing I've heard said about Steve Clifford came from Gerald Henderson, when he said that what he loved about playing for Cliff is, that what he says to you to your face is exactly what he's saying behind closed doors. Whether you like it or not, as Gerald said, you know where you stand. I think that's really important. Cliff is an extremely transparent person. As an example of this, when he volunteered about Malik Monk's conditioning issues coming off that ankle sprain at that media luncheon a couple of weeks ago, he's going to say what he thinks. He's not going to be unreasonably harsh about it. He's not going to throw people under the bus, but you're going to know where you stand. And for that reason, Dwight knows who he is, knows what he's about, but this is the first time he's been the guy's head coach. That changes the relationship a little bit. For that reason, we'll see how this works out.
Earlier, you talked about Dwight's arrival having an effect on the team overall by sending Cody Zeller's talons to that second unit and having Cody Zeller go face-to-face with the team's second big. Let's talk about Dwight's impact with the players that he'll be playing most often with. I'm thinking about how he's going to affect Kemba's pick-and-roll game as a screener, or maybe Michael Kidd-Gilchrist and his defense, what effect having a traditional rim protector will have on the scheme overall. Who do you think is impacted most by Dwight's arrival, players that are playing with him?
It should be Kemba and Nick Batum, because they're obviously generating, between the two of them, they're probably generating 90% of the offensive movement. If Dwight really takes it to his heart to be a terrific pick and roll player, there's no reason he won't be. Doug, I the other day when I was looking through some stats from last season, and I found this one particularly interesting. While the Hornets had one of the highest percentages in the league in points derived from free throws, they were just about at the bottom of the league in points in the paint. I don't think, either one of us is terribly surprised by that, but even if it's not a shock, it is a rattle. And hopefully Dwight can help create some balance in the offense so that they're not, one of the things that's somewhat inefficient about their offense is while they take a lot of threes, they're not a great three-point shooting team. I think the floor needs to be much more balanced this season, and hopefully Dwight being backed up by Cody can help do that.
As we wrap up here, Rick, thanks so much for joining us. I want to go back to the $100,000 donation, because I think you would have some good sort of context and perspective on this. Is that a big deal? Because I just don't know. Like in the past, players doing things like this. It seems like a big deal to me because he was traded here. It wasn't like he was a free agent acquisition that needed to sort of prove something that he picked this place and is committed. He did this sort of on his first day back to Charlotte. Is this a big deal?
Well, you'll remember that the end of the original Hornets here and the beginning of the Bobcats here, there was that 2-year span in between. And I was, kind of going around trying to write about expansion and different things. And Dwight was a high school senior at Southwest Atlanta Christian Academy at the time. And I went down there and interviewed him. The reason I meant to bring that up is Dwight talks about how there was no place like that kind of a boys and girls club atmosphere for him at the time. He comes from a pretty nasty neighborhood in Atlanta. He had great parents. His father was a state trooper. His mother was gym teacher. And they, but my point is, he remembers that kids need safe, constructive places to be after school. And so I'm not at all surprised that an effort like the Boys and Girls Club is close to his heart. Of course, it's a big deal that he wrote a $100,000 check. No matter how much money you have, your willingness to do those things is important. And remember, this wasn't just a matter of writing a check. I thought it was pretty cool that he wanted to show up at that elementary school, and he interacted with those kids for a long, long time. He slapped every one of their hands on the way out of that auditorium that day. I thought that was a pretty cool scene.
Rick Bonnell, Hornets beat writer for the Charlotte Observer. Rick, whatever happens this season with Dwight Howard on the roster, it's going to be interesting to cover this team. I think that's fair to say, right?
Without a doubt. And, Doug, in that regard, I think that people are underestimating just a little bit the idea that depth was the biggest problem last season. They're by definition a deeper team. If they can take advantage of the options they have this season, Rich Cho has addressed a really significant flaw in this team.
Great point. Should be fun to watch. Thanks so much, Rick, for joining us this morning, and we'll talk to you later on in the season.
Sure thing, Doug. Have a nice day.